welcome back to Dev Game Club, the weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, the man for whom the Immelman maneuver was named,
Tim Longo.
Right? That's what Timothy is short for, right? Timothy Immelman maneuver, right? Timothy.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I thought. Or
good.
Tim maybe is short for the Immelman. I don't know. I forget you explained it at one point, but I was driven kind of up a wall with that one, and I just stopped listening.
Well, come on. How old is Tim then? I want to know that then. What's the family history here? Sorry.
He was named for his father, his grandfather rather, the Red Baron. So.
Oh.
Yeah. Great, maybe, or something like that. Yes, hi, I'm here, and as you already heard, we have a special guest, as we promised. We sort of promised, but always had a backdoor in case Larry wasn't able to make it, but we're gracious that he's here. And Larry, we didn't tell you this beforehand, but last
this is
episode...
Larry Holland. You should probably say his last name.
I'm going to get there. Larry Holland is with us, obviously creator, founder, and creative director, and key programmer at Totally Games, founder of Totally Games in the 90s. But he's been around since the 80s and has worked in all sort of facets of game development by now. And really not trying to toot your own horn, Larry, but a legend in the industry. So we're really happy to have you on. Last episode, we actually... I don't know if you remember Reed Derleth or Reed Knight and Darren Johnson, who were two key testers on TIE Fighter.
Cool.
Yeah, so we had them on last time because we actually hadn't had an episode that focused on QA yet. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to have them on to talk about that in terms of TIE Fighter. So Larry, actually, is an interesting history. We've talked about it in the previous episodes with the audience some, but one of the cool things about Larry specifically when it comes to the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games and his World War II games as well is that he, as he would be quick to remind people, never actually was a LucasArts employee, but LucasArts always published his games, and he was kind of a trailblazer when it comes to starting indie studios back in the day, where he started Totally Games in 94, I believe. Was that right, Larry? Around there, Incorporated, maybe?
Yeah, that's when I incorporated.
Officially.
I was actually... I like to call myself the accidental entrepreneur, since it's the last thing when I moved to California in the 80s that I would end up being a business person and being in technology and, of course, even building games. So actually started independently in 1985.
Right. And there was a Super Zaxxon.
I actually came right before that. So the first company that I worked for, and really the only company I've ever worked for, was a company called Hessware. Hessware, the HES stood for Human Engineered Software.
Whoa. And,
they were doing VIC-20 and Commodore 64 games, cartridge games, so like they were just small, simple games, but really fun to play, 8K, 16K cartridges, really early days in microcomputers, home computers. So I fell into it quite accidentally, because I had moved to California not to pursue the great, world of technology, but to go to UC Berkeley and pursue my doctorate in anthropology, since I had studied undergraduate and then traveled the world and gone to some really exotic places like East Africa and India, because I really loved the story of human evolution and was into prehistory and stuff. So Berkeley was the mecca of anthropology and particularly human origins. So I came to California, and lo and behold, I was rooming with someone temporarily, and they had an Atari 800 and had a educational game running, and he was trying to figure it out, and it was sort of love at first sight. So that became a grand and happy detour in my life to learn about the early computers and microcomputers and the fact that you could buy them and on relatively inexpensively and with a manual or two, start teaching yourself, since of course there was no academic path or way really to learn except to teach yourself, and ultimately got a job at Hessware and that's when Super Zaxxon happened, to make a long story short. And, got, bitten by the bug, which, all of us here talking, since I think collectively we have many, many decades of time and enjoyment and sweat and tears, of course, too, of working in the games industry. So, yeah, I really haven't looked back. That training in anthropology gave me some really interesting perspective on life and ultimately influenced me in games in ways that even at the time I didn't realize would happen. I thought it was a great detour in my life, but there is a connection which I only understood later on. But maybe as we talk, some of that will become apparent.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. I remember you telling me that back in the day, and I forgot until you just mentioned again the anthropology and archaeology background. It's super.
Well, it certainly gave me a love of history, and great events and influences, and probably my life. I started at the beginning, which was why I was interested in human origins, and really studied the physical evolution of human beings, and then the cultural evolution, and then understanding the foundation of civilization and cities and all other sort of human development. But as time went on, I got closer and closer to the present. So about that time in the 80s, I was starting to be interested in Roman civilization, and then sort of fast forwarded to modern history. So when I started actually doing some naval simulations, which is how I first got connected to Lucasfilm Games, it was called back then, a small group of, I think there were 10 developers at Lucasfilm, or what became LucasArts. And I ended up partnering with Noah Falstein, who had come up with the idea of doing naval simulations that were ultimately published by Electronic Arts. And this is some of these early games, 1986, 1987. So that really got me turned on to doing simulations and doing military themed products. And when we pitched a third game to EA, they were hemming and hawing a little bit about it. So at that time, since they were LucasArts, Lucasfilm was still interested in working with me, they sort of threw me on to doing some real grunt work on the conversion to double high res, it was called, of Apple II. I don't know if there was a special secret mode of Apple II graphics that were superior to the sort of common graphic. Anyway, I got thrown on that project to take the story adventure games, the Scum games, the early ones. We're talking Maniac, and I guess Zach McCracken might have been. You guys know the year of Zach McCracken? What year was that? Was that 80s?
Yeah, I think it was in the 80s.
Yeah,
I know it was in the 80s.
I don't remember.
Anyway, I was put on that to sort of make that, because
it was in 88.
88, yeah. That makes sense. Because anyway, so I was put on that project, and I thought, I'd really like to do my own game, and I really like these simulations, military, but how about one that was history-based? So in sort of the reading up for this pitch that we were calling, I don't even think it had a code name, but it was the third after Strike Fleet. So the games didn't actually mention the titles of PHM, Pegasus, and Strike Fleet, which are the games that were designed by Noah Falstein that I worked on. We were looking to do this third one, and that didn't happen, and that's what led me eventually to do some research, though, on World War II. And once I started reading about World War II, like I had never done before, of course I kind of knew the broad strokes of it, but not really the military history, and particularly the air war, that it just was totally fascinating to me. The epic story, but also the individual stories of pilots. So that's sort of one touch point of where my sort of academic side really was able to come to the fore, because I really enjoyed research. So the idea of diving deep into the historical sort of pilot stories and such, I really enjoyed. So that all carried me to eventually pitched my first game, original game, to Lucasfilm Games, and that would have been in 1988, which that became Battlehawks 1942, and was quite a fun project. Noah Falstein was the producer, and and so we've had a lot of touch points in our careers. So we worked together in different capacities. So as part of that conversation and development of that project and design of that project, which happened remarkably fast in 6-7 months from a one-page overview, which was originally called Airwing, became Battlehawks. It was proposed in March, started in April, and shipped in September for the Christmas.
Seriously?
Yeah. So.
Wow. So one of the categories that we want to touch on throughout, and you can come back to later maybe, we definitely want to ask about the engines and how this engine, obviously now you could talk about the Battlehawks engine and how you guys developed that, and then if any of that stuck around for the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games, or what the sort of progression was there from the technology perspective. But keep going on the story of the trilogy, of the World War II trilogy, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, it began in first quarter of 1988, and one of the things was happening was there was the big shift from the early microcomputers, meaning the Commodore 64 and the Apple II, which was where the big market was, to the IBM PC.
Yeah.
And so there was, of course, rapid evolution going on, but those machines were beginning to be, used for gaming. Up to that point, IBM had entered the market really from a business standpoint, and but some early games were showing some of the possibilities, and there was also some rapid development happening on the graphics side. I don't know if you guys remember CGA graphics. CGA graphics were four-color graphics.
I know.
Oh my God!
I remember when I got my first 4-color card. As a kid. It was a grand day.
Grand day, but then it advanced to EGA, which was enhanced graphics adapter, which pushed up to 16 colors, and then VGA came shortly afterwards, which was 256. But that ushered in, I think, the PC. And PC clones, of course, PC compatibles being gaming platforms. So I went out and bought myself IBM AT 12 megahertz machine, 286, top of the line, and taught myself 8086 assembly language, because that's what you had to write in mostly. It was a combination of 8086 and C. There were some compilers as well. So that began a very long evolution of technology and an engine that really carried all the way through the World War II series and through the full X-Wing series up to X-Wing Alliance. There was architecture and sort of even some residual code that morphed and got replaced, but kept being used to some degree. And anyway, the whole sort of philosophy of how the game was built, and the mission builder that was used, and the AI system, was really, the seeds of that were all in Battlehawks. And also the sort of structure of the team as it evolved in the days of Battlehawks. There was the team was one programmer, me, and the mission builder was me, and there were two artists. And of course there was some sound, and there was some other sort of accessories, but that was the team. And obviously as time went on, things got more designs got more ambitious, the projects got more involved and stuff. But even the follow-on, which was their finest hour, the Battle of Britain, which then led to Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe, or affectionately known as SWATL, as their finest hour was affectionately known as Bob, Battle of Britain. But it also set a pattern, though, and this is also where my sort of academic background and interest in anthropology really came before, was the idea of designing a game and reliving history from both sides. And I think that was pretty unique and revolutionary at the time, and maybe even controversial to some people, because even in the case of Battlehawks, which was, that was set in the Pacific War of 1942, that showing or allowing you to play as the Japanese was maybe to a World War II American veteran somewhat controversial.
Yeah.
But and then the later games were probably even slightly more controversial, because there you were able to play from the German perspective. Both and their their finest hour, and actually be a Nazi for goodness sakes. And I think that one of the things that helped that process was that we really structured the game and designed the game to be partly a history lesson and partly a way to understand that pilots, for whatever side you were on, it was a life and death struggle. They had their nationality, their commitment, and such, to the point where, and then we supported that with a strong manual that really gave some background on those.
Back then, people would have been reading the manuals. One of the things, one of the things we find these days, we go back and play these games, and the first, I'll just jump in and I'll be playing. I'll be like, I don't know how to do anything.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the first episode, every time Tim's like, "Didn't you look at the manual?" I'll be like, I forgot to look at the manual.
Yeah, well, the manual's the last resort, and obviously it's. Even back then it wasn't so much to learn. I mean, it was to support you to play the game, but it was also to support your experience of the game, to round out the story, to fill in the bigger perspective about the topic of the game. So I think that was one of the things we were trying to achieve.
We talked in the first episode when we started playing TIE. We did, so we'd love to hear your perspective on, Larry, because you're talking about sort of the history of this from a development perspective, but talked about the flight sim genre specifically in that era, and some of this is obviously this is based on our memory as gamers at the time, and some as developers, but you were ahead of us on that. But my memory as a gamer back then is that the flight sim genre was at the forefront of graphics, and polygonal started coming in there, and it felt like at the time when you did get that new IBM or what have you, the games you wanted to play to really showcase your new machine were really flight sims at the time. And to your point, you had the Falcons, and you had the Spectrum Holobyte stuff, where like you said, the manual
F-16.
was F-16 with the manual was this Bible, right? This thick thing that was meant to be overcome and mastered, and it was this albatross that you had to carry with you into battle.
Well, in some ways,
it was part of the cool factor for those games as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they were definitely designed to. I mean, in fact, Microsoft's Flight Simulator was less of a game and more of
as real as possible.
Yes, right, to teach you how to fly and become potentially a pilot and prepare you for your flight instructor training. So they were extremely detailed, highly complex, and to the best you could with the technology at the time being realistic. And
authentic.
Exactly, authentic, and that's why you bought your IBM. It was a strong, powerful machine. It was getting stronger, more powerful all the time, and it could handle that. With the World War II series, we tried to take a slightly different tack, even though the games were simulations, but they were more combat simulations than they were flight simulators, and that may be sort of splitting hairs, but it was about recreating the environment of battle and less to minutely, represent
the avionics. Or
exactly, having all sort of the details. I wanted you to immerse you suspend your disbelief about I'm in this world where I have wingmates and we're in battle and we're at this pivotal point of history.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we did talk about that kind of balance that I felt like that your games did have compared to the Falcons and the F-16s, and the others out there, because there was this, and you're kind of you're alluding to it, I think, in the way that it's really interesting and cool to hear you talk about the games, because I don't think you and I have ever had a deep conversation about how you got to the World War II trilogy, but there's storytelling in there. I mean, the missions to me, and Swaddle's a really good example, because to your point, I remember it was controversial at the time, and the perspective shifting was not done very much in any games at the time, and the World War II first-person shooters weren't really a thing yet, so there wasn't that perspective anywhere else, and there was this storytelling that was going on in this sim that had enough, just the right recipe of gaminess, the right recipe of, like you said, fantasy fulfillment, and the right recipe of simulation, but it wasn't over-indexing on any one of those things. It was a good mixture, and I felt like that ended up being a good segue into the Star Wars games as well, where there was a sense of almost this fictional history, of course, but there's still that military bent and that military theme. So, can you talk about some of maybe that migration? Because it sounds like you guys had specific mentality set up with the World War II games, and then what was the transition like from going to that to a fictional, basically flight battle scenario, which we'll get to, I think, later too, that it really felt like you were simulating being a TIE fighter pilot or an X-Wing pilot, and that was one of the coolest parts.
Well, you're definitely covering some good ground, because the transition was a very natural one, for a number of reasons, and there's sort of business reasons within the company, and that the licenses were, while the third game Swaddle was being wrapped up, and even before that, the sort of the similarity or the applicability of the technology and the gaming approach and simulation approach that was being used in these games, and how they would naturally flow to the classic Star Wars universe was just obvious.
Yeah.
And how it came about is probably not that interesting, except to say that, while I was wrapping it up, others within the games division were sort of starting to take the mantle and say, hey, and talking with me about, hey, if you don't apply what you've been doing to make an X-Wing game, I'm going to do it, and and not so many words, but exactly that. But
it's just so natural.
It's absolutely natural. Yeah, and as you say, at that point in time too, we're talking again late '91, early '92. The Star Wars universe was kind of in the doldrums, or it was very quiet. And from a gaming perspective, there were some arcade games, but nothing had been done for the PC market and home computers in general. So it was really ripe. And at that time, actually, some of the best material was the Heir to the Empire trilogy, the Timothy Zahn novels. Admiral Thrawn and all that. We're keeping it alive. There was some writing happening, and that was the best. We felt like the best of it, but it was really quiet. And as I said, the opportunity within the games division, which had up to that point, it was the property was being licensed to other companies, and the internal games group, which I was effectively a part of because I was working closely with up that point for 6 years. So anyway, we started talking about X-Wing, and there was a number of people within the organization that wanted to be a part of it. So it wasn't hard to take some of my existing team and meld that with some internal people within the games group and start start on X-Wing, which relied on the technology that was used, at least from the standpoint of the AI and the mission design and the mission builder tools that would allow you to, create the missions themselves. But almost every generation of game or new game, there was a new renderer. And starting with Swaddle, I had expanded the team mightily from one person to two people. So Swaddle had two people. Had me and Peter Lincroft, and he was the 3D engine or the rendering engine guy. And when we got to X-Wing, it was 3D. The hosannas went up, and real time graphics, no longer the two-dimensional sprites, which were the key technology that allowed me to make these games, and the idea that a rotating scaling 2D sprite technology wouldn't just be there as part of the GPU is hard to fathom. But yes, that was technology, was the old technology, and we could start with real time 3D. So when we got to X-Wing, our team on the programming side expanded to 3 people. So we were really making great strides, and that was Ed Killam, who did the cinematic engine and did all of the cutscenes that were not pre-rendered cinematic tour de force like they are today, but they were 2D and paper doll sliding animation system. But hey, it was cool. For the time, cool. It was like, wow, we can at least sort of come close to the feel of what a cinematic experience would be like, capturing some audio from the movies and some imagery, etc. So anyway, that and some of the as I said, the team kind of grew naturally in fairly short order, and that project was started in end of '91, and I think it's the beginning of '92, and shipped in February of '93, and it was very exciting. So you alluded to. I just wanted to say something you said that I think is really apropos, which is that even though it wasn't history, it was film history. So it had created a universe filled with characters and events and signature moments and grand arc history and all that. So it was a very sort of similar experience where we dove in to sort of the research of all the guides that were there, and there's of course role-playing games. I look at
the games, and I also see. It leaps out to me, you being in anthropology, like only an anthropologist would make the front end of the game a concourse with all these people around it. Because that's one thing that struck me. I'd kind of forgotten because it had been some time since I played one of these games. But to pop into TIE Fighter or to the original X-Wing, I had totally forgotten that you were on this concourse, and there were people at all these different stations, sort of reacting to you entering doors and things like that. And that to me sounds like an anthropologist, reflecting what an environment would be like, more so than. Because a lot of other games are very much like checklists. Like at Falcon, I don't recall having anything like that. I mean, there was like, okay, you're in a taxi now. There was like a briefing sort of thing, but there wasn't
just front end heavy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but this is sort of the human element, right? Where the first thing you see is somebody talking to you rather than just a menu. Yeah, which is
it's an attempt to be immersive, right? To put you in the environment, in a place, in the spaceport or in a calamari cruiser or wherever. So it was alive, and there were things going on, coming and going as time went on. Further on the series, that could be the fidelity of all that could be much richer. But we did our best back in the day with some of the smallest little things.
Yeah. No, it had a big impact, and I would say it's emulated today, right? I mean, it's really, there's a lot of games that still have that sort of using the immersion of that front end experience as a tool to get people into the experience more quickly. You know,
Absolutely.
I think it's really. Yeah, and then back to your point about sort of the film history side of it, we talked about this, I think, on the previous couple of previous episodes of just even George himself, right, had admitted to and had talked about how World War II movies were a big influence on him for the space battles, right? And the space battles especially the classic trilogy are so, World War II feeling. And I guess until we started talking, it didn't really occur to me how natural of a progression this really was for you guys, in a good way.
And in fact, the story, whether it's apocryphal or not, I don't really know. But in terms of the making of the trench run in particular and the space battle around the end of the first movie, that the gun camera footage, which is some of the most powerful imagery that comes out of World War II, when you see the actual tracers going out from one fighter who's on the tail of another, and you see them hitting the plane in front that's trying to escape, and the speeds of all that, and the proximity of all that, and the intensity of the chunks flying off, and the fuel tanks getting hit and exploding. All that is really sort of the most seat of the pants, visceral part of a air battle, and they wanted some of that in Star Wars, because they understood the speeds at which the craft should be traveling, the rates at which they can maneuver, and the proximity in which the two craft are is what makes the game, or the film experience, and certainly the game, much more cinematic and more fun to play, right? That's why I never got into something like the modern fighter stuff, because it was mostly radar, missile locks,
beyond visual range,
visual range, and
it doesn't feel grounded.
I recently read John Glenn's memoir because he passed, and I kind of wanted to read up on him a little bit more, and he had gone from World War II, into World War II in the Pacific, to Korea, and even in that span of time, the closing speeds had dramatically increased, and then he was in test aircraft, in the late 50s and into the early 60s, and it was just, he would describe, and it was funny, one thing I noted in particular was he knew. He could list you all the characteristics of any aircraft he ever flew. And speaking to your viscerality kind of point, it's just like he would say, well, the Corsair was this, and it had these kind of engines, and and it performed really well in this way, but it was not great at this. It just like on and on. It
was life or death, right? How those things, controlled, and how fast they were, and the relative speeds depending on which craft you're flying against. Right. If the turning radius, or the acceleration, or how quickly it could do, as you were referring to, an Immelman or S-turn, or any of these other maneuvers, all those factors meant life or death.
Yeah. Well, as a quick segue to that, to your point about the visceral side of what we talk about as the fantasy fulfillment of these games, especially for people like me who are uber Star Wars fans, and remembering as a youngster playing these games and feeling like a pilot, there's the other interesting side of these games specifically, and I guess talking specifically about X-Wing and TIE Fighter, there is a simulation aspect to it, right? You can control your speed, you can control your energy reserves, and there's some micromanagement in there that you could say has some, creates a little bit of tension between that and the visceral aspect of the battles, and there's still a bit of a learning curve, but it's not as extreme as some of those uber, hardcore sims. So do you have any thoughts or stories about sort of like that balance that you guys tried to strike, about how complicated did you want it to get? Because one of the exciting things is, once, for me, we talked about this a lot, Brett and I debated it here and there, there's that sense of, okay, you need to master these crafts and really understand, maybe not on the John Glenn scale, but understand some of the nuance of what the right ways to use these craft are. but that gets in the way of getting to the completing the missions and having that kind of cinematic experience. So how did you guys balance not going too complex, you know?
Yeah, well, it was definitely a challenge because, as you say, you want to give some players choice and for those choices to be challenged depending on the situation and missions. And back in the early days, the controllers were mostly keyboard, and then we started getting joysticks that had, you know, a larger number of buttons that could be mapped to certain functions. Because as much as it was in the context of the Star Wars games, energy management of your craft, which ultimately was speed, and in any air or space battle, speed is life. But also that energy management, you know, fed the shields and recharging your laser. So it was actually, I think we found a nice balance between, you know, self-preservation, being able to attack, have offensive capabilities, and being able to get out of trouble or catch up. So those sort of three aspects. But then as time went on, the sort of other aspect of the battle was really the situational awareness and being able to assess what's going on and what I should do right now. And that required you to assess not just your state, but the state of the battle and what is close, and where are your friends, where are your enemies, and who's in trouble, who needs to get to attack now because they're going to attack somebody else, etc. So sort of sorting out that whole situational awareness, frankly, in X-Wing, we did a very poor job on because we hadn't sort of figured out that we needed to provide the user with some more options and ways to quickly figure out, you know, who's attacking me and target him so I can figure out where he is, so I can turn the tables on him.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that the thing I probably did the most of that was along those lines was storing off targets that I knew I either had to protect, or which were going to be, you know, targets, big targets.
Yeah,
so
we
I didn't
didn't
keep track of where they were.
Yes,
we didn't play X-Wing right before playing TIE Fighters, but I had forgotten. You're right. There are actually some key additions to the design when it comes to the controls and the targeting system
particularly the targeting system.
X-Wing, right, is what you're saying, right? And,
yes,
and
right. And the information that was in the CMD, as it was called, the video HUD at the bottom of the screen to tell you, what's the state of this target, etc. Were all vital. But it became this interesting dance because we kept wanting to make the battle be more interesting and more not just complex, but have more nuance to it and more elements to it over time. So to sort out what's going on in that battle, you need to assess more information more quickly. Yeah. So as a sort of like tug of war of, okay, we got to add some, you know, specialized commands. For instance, I think it was Shift R was like the nearest enemy who was attacking me. You know, and there's like you cycle through the targets, but that's really tedious, especially as the scale of the battle increased.
Yeah, or if there are mines. You know.
That's right. I don't want the mine. I want the guy. I want the guy who's closest on my tail, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So it was this interesting evolution to understand the combat environment and try to support that with commands, but then of course that just loaded up the number of commands.
Yeah, I mean that's the trick, right? Especially with franchises going over multiple games. And take it from me, right now working on Halo, right? You have that evolution. You want to improve upon the player's ownership and options that they have to control their situations, but. You know, every time you add another command or another ability or another something, you know, you're gonna make things more convoluted and then get more complex, and that is a really hard balance to find that right sweet spot of, you know, not too complex, but
yeah. One of the things I remember was, and it might have been at the end of X-Wing, the ability to target the thing that's in your sight.
Yeah, right.
So that instead of like having to shift T or T, hit the go forward or back through all the targets to figure out who's that guy right in front of me.
Right.
Being able to click and target the thing that was right in your sight was like, wow, that was like a big aha. And figuring out a much better way to sort out the combat scenario.
Yeah, it's the age-old that's such an obvious thing that we will always have it from here on out, but we didn't even think about it until then. Yeah. So can you? So you were talking about sort of adding nuance and sort of subtlety and interesting scenarios to the mission design. Can you talk about a little bit more about that? Maybe also segue a little bit into the mission editor itself. We hit that a little bit, and I know that's something that Brett worked on our mission, built our mission editor for the Starfighter game, so it's close to close to him as well. But one thing, it was interesting to play TIE Fighter throughout the core game, and then we played Defender of the Empire, I think it's called, and then Enemies. So there's the 2 expansion packs essentially, and you definitely see, to your point, you see the mission designers trying to add in some interesting scenarios, because they're trying to mix it up from the core game. There's missions where you're a spy and you're having to hide, amongst the enemy, and then there's sort of that great mission where there's a code word somebody says, and then it's like you spring the trap, and all of that stuff.
Killamar.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You remember that. So yeah, can you talk about sort of the progression of the mission design and maybe some of the, because you had mission designers, full time at this point, right, for TIE Fighter?
That's correct. Yeah. And about halfway through X-Wing is when the light bulb went on to say, I think it's time we bring it. Well, time to bring them in, partly because we actually had an engine and a mission builder to make it even possible. But I think one of the things that it's a little bit hard to know where to start, but one of the things I wanted to talk about was in the progression of the series, not just that the missions got, say, more complex, but they became more multi-level and more replayable, because we created this idea of multi-level goals. In X-Wing, probably not only was the game hard and probably too hard, although some people are masochists and they just love hard games, but what you had to do to win was relatively invisible. I mean, it was discussed in the briefing, but there wasn't a constantly updating set of goals that got ticked off when you accomplished them. And one of the big advances of a TIE Fighter is not only did we have multi-level goals, but we actually showed you what they were as you went along. It's like, wow, big wow, right? Let the player be informed on what's going on. But
now I'm glad we played TIE Fighter instead of
yes. Your experience would have been significantly different, and you would be probably yelling at me a lot more.
Yeah, but, I totally forgot about that.
And then as time went on, I mean, it became really sophisticated in X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, and then ultimately X-Wing Alliance, where we had different regions and we had not just multi-level goals, but either-or kind of goals, so you could make options to complete a mission one way or another. It didn't require you to do things in lockstep order that the designer had selected.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things talking to Reed and Darren, because we, and I was testing on XVT, but they were testing TIE Fighter, and to your point, and I don't know if you remember, but the two of them had this sort of friendly competition between the two of them of sort of getting the highest score on any mission.
Yeah.
And it really was a testament to the mission designs, because they were able to really milk and kind of get creative about how they were going to milk the most out of each mission, because, like you said, it was multifaceted.
Absolutely,
and QA was the best place to really stress test those systems, because
those guys were insanely good. Those guys were insanely good, and they had to play and replay, so they learned not just how to complete them, but to be the completion fanatic, as I like to call the sort of the hardcore player who likes to figure out, maximize his score, and also to try different methods to actually complete it, since one of the goals of the mission design was not to force a strict linear, within a mission, a linear set of do this, do that, go here, go there. Always there was some choice within the player to see if he could attempt to take on this squadron or flight group over here, take them out, go over here, protect this, etc. So that was always one of the sort of the core design principles to allow that kind of user choice. But in terms of the mission builder, again, it grew out of Swaddle, which actually had a mission builder built into the game.
Right.
And
I forgot
you actually, because it was like incredibly. I learned so much doing that game because it was my third in the World War II series. I'm going to digress a little bit here. One of the things that I'd always been told through my history is beware of the designer's second game. Because the second game is where they've learned all the lessons from the first game and they put everything in they forgot of the first game.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So I didn't actually learn that lesson until my third game. So my third game became the epic World War II game.
Right.
So I had all kinds of modes. I had the mission builder in. I had a campaign mode. You could play the campaign mode from both sides. So you could try to defeat Germany, and in that mode you actually designed the missions that you would fly and how you would attack Germany, and it would, and also could auto-generate missions. So anyway, and it still had both sides. So when we got to the X-Wing series, one of the first lessons we took from that experience was not try to do both sides in one game, because that game, the Swaddle, I probably spent an extra 9 months laboring on by myself in a building of Kerner Boulevard. And there's probably stories about, because at the time, Kerner is in San Rafael, California, and I lived in Cloverdale, which was up northern Sonoma County, a good hour and a half.
Far.
It's far. It's a ways. So there were plenty of nights when I did not make it home, and I was unmarried at the time. It was didn't have a family to take care of, so I slept many nights in Kerner Boulevard in a building trying to finish Swaddle. And it was they call it the long death march. I was in the long crunch mode. I was in crunch mode on that for well over a year. It's amazing I survived. So, but anyway, so I learned a lot of lessons from that third game. And
and so some of that game. Yeah, you're making me want to go back and play it now that you're redescribing, because I haven't played it in so long. And
well, it's like most of these games from this era, you have to be very kind to the graphics and the controls, and it doesn't show us age well. My favorite. Yeah, but
you put the history goggles on.
Yeah.
For sure.
But I had a great manual. I had like a 250-page manual, and to support that. I loved that. I loved that experience, as hard as it was. But anyway, it had a mission builder built in, which was to bring us back circle to mission builder.
Yeah.
So that's when the mission builder began to be a thought about tool for others, as opposed to me just cobbling together an interface and working on some data structures, etc. It became something that a third person would actually work on. So all along, when we got to the X-Wing series, we knew that a mission builder was essential to parallelizing tasks and having a team work on it, and delivering a lot of good content. Since I was more interested in creating the behaviors and the AI, if you will, what would drive the behavior of all the different crafts in the game, than actually build the missions themselves. So yeah.
And that was. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so some of the part of the natural progression was a couple of the testers on Swaddle became the mission builders on X-Wing.
So was that Westman at the time, or who?
Yeah, it was David Maxwell and David Westman.
Yeah, right. The two Daves. Yep. Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. We've talked about it a couple times, but I think this is the first time we've talked that deeply about it. Just the concept that we take tools for granted these days, right? Because you're talking about a transition in development when it wasn't a given that there was a tool to build a game, right? And shooters went through this as well, right? Like every genre has their time when they're hiring some sort of mission or level designer for the first time because they realize that it needs to be this separate job, right? And that they would need a tool. And it's just always fascinating to me because it's something we just take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and how games are made, they had to be invented. So a lot of the techniques and tools, we were figuring out how to build games while we were building the games, as well as building the renderer, building the projector, building the film projector while working on it. So it's
having to build another one, the next year besides.
Yeah. The cycle of Christmas, Christmas release was everything back then.
Yeah.
So
it's
you mentioned
still pretty big.
Yeah, still pretty big. So you mentioned behaviors. That's something that you really got into. What was it that you liked about it? And we did.
Well, it was. At a very fundamental level, it was. Baron von Frankenstein. It's alive. Taking something that didn't do anything. And having it simulate some kind of quasi-intelligent behavior was just really a really fascinating problem, and to then apply that into an environment where each entity, spacecraft, would have a slightly different behavior, but have also a hierarchy of behavior, so that, for instance, in X-Wing, and as time went on, you had squadrons or flight groups, as we call them, because they weren't really big enough to be true squadrons, but they had leaders and they had wingmen, and they, quote, the wingmen, quote, took their cues from the squadron leaders or flight group leaders, and flew in formation. And then when the battle was joined and the primary targets were determined, they would break off, but still, work in concert to some degree and such. So that kind of mix of leaders and subordinates, and then different types of what I called orders back then of escorting groups and primary attack groups and other disabling groups and capturing groups. Each had their sort of primary objectives, and how those wiring them up and figuring out a system, a state machine, and data structures to then expose those into a tool that, with a relatively small number of choices of high-level actions or orders, as I just called them, could play out in a very rich and dynamic way. And as time went on through, and the sort of greatest expression of it was X-Wing Alliance, the capability of the mission builder and through the tool became that much greater through being able to sort of specify a rich array of options. They never had to script or write code because it was always structured to be the mission tool, the mission builder, focused on very high level things and drawing on the behavior set that I created. So my job, one of my jobs, at least on the programming and tech side, was to create a rich set of behaviors and orders and maneuvers, because everything sort of filtered down. It was like you had this sort of the high level objectives, or my job is to attack these sets of targets, and when that's done, go over here and escort this group. But to enable that or to express that in actual action within the game, there's a whole set of decisions that are being made and being reevaluated and reprioritized and selected from. And one of the key components of that was actually the simple setting up of what, quote, targets, which would identify the set of craft that any other set of craft would prioritize as its most important thing, creating a rich data language for identifying targets so that the mission builders could specify, go after, these TIE fighters that are escorting this ship. I want, and
Right.
it was really,
the rule sets.
Yeah, that rule set was really vital to being able to choreograph a battle.
Choreograph's good. Yeah, that's a good word. Brett has often tried to describe to me behavioral and AI related tech, but it's I never.
It bounces off every time. I'm curious.
You're doing a good job there, Larry. So,
did they ever do anything that surprised you? The AI.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, some of that was bugs, but some of it was.
I meant in a good way. There.
Good way. Well, sometimes the bugs were like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Bugs become features. Absolutely, and of course, what the mission designers, builders were able to achieve, was far beyond what I imagined using their creativity and ingenuity. So, yeah, a specific example doesn't come to mind, but definitely was very happy with the results.
Yeah. Fair.
Well, one of the switching topics, and maybe this will be one of our last topics, but one of the other kind of big categories that we talked about that we hit a little bit when you mentioned the perspective during the World War II games of being from all sides of the war. What specifically with TIE Fighter, we have the agent of the Emperor that that comes up and is in most of the missions as sort of like the conduit for your secondary objectives, and kind of like giving you that backstory to the sort of, I guess I'll say, military espionage to it all, which was also very very unique at the time and very cool and very memorable and has been ripped off many times since. Do you have any stories or any memory of sort of how that came to be, and was that and maybe it's simple because it was obvious? I don't know, because coming from Swaddle or something like that, but he's such a memorable figure. I mean, I don't even think he has a name or anything like that. But
I confess I don't remember the name of the character or how it was. The name in the missions, but I
don't even
remember.
think he had one. But he's a memorable character. It's just like that concept of working for the Emperor secretly and the tattoo and all that stuff. Do you have any memories or stories about how he kind of came to be and how?
Well, I do remember the conversation because and that was the conversation with Ed Killam, where the secret society came out of. And it was driven by a desire to come up with something that combined the camaraderie of a pilot society or group but also had sort of a cloak and dagger aspect of it, that not just anybody, more like the Masons, right? There's some kind of secret part of it, right? That the secret societies gave it that sort of allure.
You're raising in the ranks of it.
Yes, yeah. And that you have some special knowledge or some insight on what's going on, or think you do. Yeah. But in some ways, showing the game from or portraying the dark side did seem, maybe just because I have I'm a schizophrenic personality or can see things from multiple perspectives, it did seem compelling and not obvious but natural.
Yeah.
Because it was such a sort of a powerful presence in the movies that. Getting closer to that or deeper into that just seemed.
Well, you did.
There was gold to be mined there.
Exactly. You didn't you didn't get to see it, right? I mean, the movies were always generally from that perspective.
It portrays it in a very black and white way, right? And the lily white and the dark black, and we know that the real world has many shades in between, and that was this. I mean, a lot of people say, in reading literature, and the antagonists, that the dark characters, the tortured characters, they're the ones that are really has something to tell.
Memorable. One of the reasons we chose the timing of playing TIE Fighter now is because of Rogue One being out. We knew it would be on people's minds, and the Death Star plans and all that sort of stuff, and by no means going into spoilers, but for anyone who hasn't seen it, but they definitely deal with some interesting sides of the gray in Star Wars, which I really enjoyed in the film, and it was fun to play this game while finishing this game while I was watching that movie too. I agree. I think the Rogue. I mean, there was a series of books, Rogue Squadron books, and has a long history in the Star Wars lore and universe of telling the story of a squadron first off, which is always. I don't know if you've ever remember the show, the Black Sheep Squadron, Pappy Boyington's Marine Corsair group in the Pacific. He was... Anyway, the story of Squadron is really a compelling one. Mm-hmm. What I was going to add to that, though, even to pop a level to... Not to get too much into politics, but the idea of the current political environment of the world and national politics and Democrat versus Republican. I'm really fascinated by the way in which we as a group and individuals as part of political parties or political discussions are able to polarize so much. And, of course, partisan politics has been the de rigueur way of doing things for 8 years and beyond, a long time. For us as human beings to recognize that there is another side to a story, and that the perspective of another political party is not complete hogwash. Mm-hmm. And I'll drop a plug here for one of the most influential books I've read in the last 5 years. It's called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt.
Yes.
Sadly, his last name is, I think it's pronounced Haidt or Height. I think it's Height, actually. Anyway, it's a book about the partisan politics, but it really is about, we paint the other side as black and our side as white, and I think it has great relevance when we think about the Star Wars universe and how the story of TIE Fighter is again trying to nuance that the black, maybe the Emperor's black, Darth Vader's black, but there's a whole millions of people who have been swept into it in some fashion that aren't to a core black, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing to understand. Well said. Well, I mean, I feel like on that note, it's a good denouement for the closing things out. Thank you so much for being on, Larry. This is a treat. You're very welcome. It's been a great pleasure to dredge up really fun memories.
It was just a blast to play this again, and Brett and I both had our own histories with the game, and of course, we've heard from some of the audience that who hadn't played it before, and so it's been really fun to, I think, reintroduce it to people, and it's still, for me, Brett asked, I think the first question he asked me when we started on the first episode was, why is this, or what was the question, Brett? What is
basically is there any more Star Wars-y game than this? This is the Star Wars game for me.
Yeah, and it really, for me too, there's just this, to your point, really, Larry, your closing comment there was just wonderful. There's something, the perspective shift that this game has, and I will fully admit that we talked a lot about this for Republic Commando as well, because part of our goal with that game from a shooter perspective was to show the perspective from a soldier rather than from a Jedi. And we didn't have a lightsaber in the whole game on purpose. And being such a great fan of this franchise, you just don't get enough of that. And this game's burned into my memory, from that perspective. And I don't know if anybody's really captured it since. So well done once again, and thanks for being on.
Yeah, right. Wonderful. It was great. It was great to have you, Larry.
And Brett, thank you for sitting it out with us, despite your injury. So.
It took me away.
All right.
Thank you, Larry.
Yep. Cheers.
Thanks, Larry.
Sure. Bye.
Welcome back from the break. Wasn't that a fun conversation?
Yeah, Larry, he's a smart guy. I totally forgot about his archaeology and anthropology background, which is a great little tidbit that adds a whole nother level.
It does. It totally informs the design.
Yeah.
It really does, and for a lot of reasons. I mean, not just the actual what you see on the screen, but also the sort of stuff that you talked about, at the very end, where it's, that there are a lot of there are different sides to every story, and or every conflict, and and we tend to hear the victors. That doesn't mean that other people don't have a story. So it's really some deep thoughts there at the end. Yeah,
to that point, I mean, I'd also really forgotten about those, especially those World War II games. They really were stepping into territory that was not. Well, it was controversial, but just not done. People just didn't do that stuff back then, and they still don't. Right? I mean, there's still really challenges.
I don't think there was another sort of enemy aircraft game till the MiG, which was an expansion for the Falcon 4, maybe or 3, Falcon 3. So that would have been, 5 years after, say, ish. Maybe not quite 5, but like 3 or 4 years after,
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty wild to consider.
It was also cool to hear him talk so deeply about the tech side, because he definitely still, you can tell he's a programmer at heart, and he still has that love for that side of it. We've talked to some of those, but we've mainly talked to a lot of more direction and design folks too. So it was good to have him go deep on that stuff.
Yep, and a self-taught programmer on some of those early machines. He's like a brother to me, this guy. I started thinking. I looked up the place that he worked, and they had made a cartridge of Forth, which was a programming language that you will never have heard of. But
no, I've never heard of that.
But they made a cartridge-based version for the VIC or the Commodore or whatever, and that was maybe the fourth language I learned. I had a version of Forth on my Apple II, so I didn't want to take us down that rabbit hole, but I was like, wow, this guy.
Some history there.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, it's time to do some feedback, and then we'll talk about moving on. We only have just a brief bit of feedback this time. There's no new reviews, so, folks, get on that, because we love to read them. That's your New Year's resolution. And then, but we also get this email from Phil Rosehill, who, among other things, said, "I thought you might also like to know that Super Metroid will again be one of the last events of Awesome Games Done Quick 2017, which runs from January 8th, which is tomorrow, as we record this, until the 15th. There is a 4-man, 100% completion race currently scheduled for Saturday, January 14th at about 9:30 p.m. Eastern. So that is actually, we will be out in time for people to hear that. So if you would like to see 4 people doing a race of trying to complete
100%?
We couldn't even do 100%.
Oh my God, that just makes my brain hurt.
Yeah, and they're going to race. Yeah.
Yeah.
I might actually watch that.
That's pretty. I bet you there's going to be some high drama on that.
Yeah. I had my girlfriend here with me this Saturday, but I think next Saturday I might be free. I might be able to figure that out.
Plan ahead. It's not the Super Bowl. It's better.
Yeah. In the morning I just got to be like, honey, I'm just I don't know about tonight. Anyway. So thanks for that, Phil. Good to know. And I have watched some of those. I think Phil was who sent in several links before, and I love that stuff. So I haven't watched a whole one, but I might just for the drama of watching it live, make some popcorn. Anyway, but yeah, it's now it's time for moving on. It's we've already talked about what our next games are.
TIE Fighter was epic, by the way.
TIE Fighter was. Yeah, well, we did 6 episodes, which is. More than we've done on any game, and we had effectively 3 interviewees. So we dug deep on TIE Fighter.
It's well deserved.
It was well deserved. It was a great game. It is a great game, and now we're going to move on to Eco and Shadow of the Colossus.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and tell our gang about these 2 games and your thoughts.
Well, I mean, my rough initial thoughts, as you put me on the spot. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, Brett and I are actually talking about this a little bit pre-show or in between segments off air. It's hard to find comparisons to these games. I think obviously Ueda gets. He's the figurehead, but it's obviously a team effort for these games. But that team does have a style and a subtextual goal that they have in mind when they make their games, and they're just very unique. They're emotional games, they're subtle games, they're less is more games. They're there's a lot more going on that they don't really handhold or spoon feed you on, and then they do non-traditional things with their designs, and Brett was sort of giving some examples on The Last Guardian, which we're not going to play that, but they're not afraid to make design decisions based on the particular creative goals that they have for the particular game, and then the buildup of emotion alone for both Eco and Shadow of the Colossus when it comes to building up relationships and specific moments when those relationships shift in some way. And then I think my biggest takeaway for those games has always been their economy of design, I guess I'll say, and just really focusing on few things, but really making sure that those things are the main focus. And people will criticize as you play through with us. You'll probably criticize various things, whether it be controls, camera, frame rate, et cetera, and I think it's just about the priority that they put on different things, and
we're looking at. I mean, these are they were both PS2 titles. Both were put together in an edition for the PS3. I'll probably play that way, although I did originally play them on the PS2. I still have my PS2. I don't think I have a copy of Eco, but I do have a copy of Colossus. I don't know. I might drag it out, when we get to that point, just to remember exactly what that was like. Mm-hmm. I want to say that Team Eco, which is now, I think it's called Gen Design, something like that. His new studio
after he officially left.
After he officially left, mm-hmm. But Team Japan or Japan Studio rather. Was also responsible for a ton of, and continues to be, for a ton of games that are somewhat experimental. At least with PlayStation hardware, they're kind of a showcase for that. Mm-hmm. So you've got your Loco Roco and your Patapon. I don't know if you remember that one. It's like Rhythm RTS.
They're re-releasing Patapon, actually.
Yep. And then, they worked with From Software to do Demon's Souls, right? I mean, so they're, Echochrome was a nice puzzler I played last year.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, they're Gravity Rush, Tokyo Jungle, and then Puppeteer and Knack. They've been around through basically almost all of PlayStation, history. So, and of course, most recently, The Last Guardian. So, they are, they're a division, and they're, a large number of people probably in that studio, around 400, I believe. But it's, it's cool. So it's people who really know the hardware. And I think that was part of these games as well. They look different than other games on PlayStation 2. And I think we'll probably talk about things like that as well, because I think that's an important part. I think they are a good, even though the frame rate may not have been there at the time, I do think that they find visual, language and motifs that other people just didn't find. And they're interesting just from that standpoint. So, we'll get into all of those things.
Yep. For sure.
For next time, I want us to play just until. So there's a section where there's a windmill, which you probably remember, Tim. It was it was in the demo for the game as well. So it's they had put out a demo for this game that included the windmill. And a little bit of other stuff, but just stitched it together in a weird way. It was completely not like what the game actually shipped.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah, and there was a long time probably between the demo and the game shipping. So it was originally a PlayStation 1 title. So typical of a way to have a thing slip a whole generation or two. Play until just past the windmill. There'll be a save couch or sofa or whatever those things are.
Okay.
And you can save there. Or if you want to do the next puzzle, that's fine too. But right around there, at least do the windmill.
Sounds good.
All right, and then one final plug for me. I appeared again on Shall We Play a Game? They do a Game of the Year edition where they invite guests and critics and what have you from their year past to give their own vote for Game of the Year, and they often discuss what that person had to say, and some argument comes in, and then of course the person who's been recorded doesn't get to argue their case anymore because they just send in a clip. So I've got my eye on you guys. I see what you're doing. But yeah, I was on there in their.
Cool.
I guess it's the first episode of this year. So just came out Friday the whatever that was, 6th of January. So yeah, take a look for that. Give it a listen. It's long for their show. It's almost an hour, and we are well over an hour. So I think it's time for us to say goodnight. We are at Brett_Duville on Twitter, though I'm kind of taking a little break from Twitter.
Good for you.
Yeah, I think it's time.
That's a healthy thing to do.
Yep, he's contributing more to stress than anything else. So, meanwhile, you are
at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR in the end, and I'm
and you can find the podcast at Dev Game Club. I am actually checking that. It's very low, very low bandwidth. So if you want to tweet at us, you can definitely find me there, and I will respond to you there for sure. We'd love to have your emails. We are at devgameclub@gmail.com, and of course, the website is devgameclub.com. And it's a new year. It's time for those new reviews. I gather that helps us reach the new listeners, and it would be great to get some iTunes. And hey, I'm good with Android too. You may have to send me email and show me where I can find those, because I don't have a subscription to all of those, but I would love to read those as well. So if you do put up a review somewhere else that we might not see, shoot us an email and send a link, or even just include the text. That'd be great. I'm happy to read it. So that's it from us. Good night.
Good night.